Imagine yourself taking a group of young people for a hike in the wilderness and you get lost. After somehow finding your way back again, you try with a better map next time, but you still get lost. The kids are getting worn out and frustrated, and you want to do better by them, and you're trying your best. You keep investing in better gear, ask experts for advice, but no matter how many times you try, you keep getting lost. It's incredibly frustrating for everyone. The kids eventually grow up, and some of them try leading a new generation through the wilderness. You watch in hope, but they end up just as lost and frustrated. And then one day you realize that what you were given as a compass is actually a wristwatch. Now you might be wondering what this story has got to do with education. Surely such a massive mistake could never happen in education. Someone would have realized it by now, right? But there has been a glaring issue that's gone unnoticed for decades. These days, publicly funded universal education provision is considered essential in any democratic state. And indeed it is, because otherwise the majority of young people would be excluded from access. But we need to remember the deeper story of its origin. Most people who are aware of the history of publicly funded education know that it started in Prussia some 300 years ago. There's an emerging narrative that what and how we teach should evolve now because societal needs have evolved, and therefore we have many new pedagogies and technologies and apps and so on to improve teaching. So, for example, we believe now that we should have critical thinking rather than rote memorization, interdisciplinary projects rather than discrete subjects, guide by the side rather than sage on the stage style, etc. But what's missing from this story is that back when publicly funded schooling began, this was about state agendas, not the right to education. Education had not yet been recognized as a universal right, and young people were not recognized as rights holders. Even their teachers were not rights holders yet. The international human rights discourse is only 75 years old. The Convention on the Rights of the Child will be 35 years old this year. The aha that we need to access together is that the fundamental practices, systems, and even the language of education hasn't yet been overhauled to recognize that children are the subjects of their own rights, or even that parents and educators have basic human rights. The foundations of education as they still stand today predate all of that. An education system designed in a time when children were considered to be chattel is still being foisted on young people in an era where children are finally recognized by the 1989 UN Convention on the Rights of the Child as the subjects of their own rights. This is just as logical and effective as using a wristwatch for a compass. When we try to fumble our way through the educational landscape to where we are trying to go, simply using the fact that times have changed, we end up trying to paste various innovations onto these old foundations without really grasping that what we're actually trying to do is pull education into alignment with the evolution of human rights. Things don't work out very well, and often our best efforts currently backfire. What's needed is a nice, effective compass so that we can all see together which way is actually north. And this is the realization that can help us finally steer together in the actual direction that we're all really trying to go.
If you're watching this right now, it's likely that you have deeply held views on how society should organize education, especially the education of young people. Everybody I've ever met who wants to do anything about education has been strongly convinced about their view, and yet there's such a wide range of views that I'm unsure whether they have anything in common at all. And yet, we all want what we believe is in young people's best interests. And a framework for articulating young people's best interests already exists. The compass has existed for 35 years and it gets more refined by the year. We just need to start using it in education. So I would like to propose to you that if we want to unite across the board around something that is actually right for children and the adults who support them, we should begin with universal human rights and the rights of the child as the compass to guide our journey. And I propose that we be explicit about it. For example, I am the co-founder of Sri Lanka's first and only rights-centric democratic school, Kinder Republic. Why we call it a democratic school is to make explicit something that many people are starting to realize, that if we want to live in a democratic society, then we have to have democracy in all spheres, including in how we provide education to young people. It's not sufficient for children to learn about democracy so that they can participate in democracy when they're adults. It's about experiencing democracy now because they are already people now. And the reason we call it a right-centric democratic school is also to make explicit something that many people are starting to realize. Democracy is not just a form of government, it's ultimately about striving to respect and realize human rights. To give some examples of what that looks like in practice, children participate in the governance of the school, not just because participatory decision-making leads to better decisions, but because we uphold their right to be heard. Children are not segregated by age, not just because mixed age groups lead to better educational outcomes, but because we uphold their right to freedom of association. We don't have any kind of punishment, not just because living in fear of punishment is not conducive to learning, but because children have a right to be free from all forms of violence. Children spend a lot of time in unsupervised play that is not directed by adults because we are upholding their right to play. And by definition of that right, it isn't play if it is directed by adults. So with all these examples, you might be wondering why, when all UN member states, except the United States of America, have ratified the Convention on the Rights of the Child, why aren't rights-based practices mainstream in all educational settings? It's because of the dark origins of publicly funded education. Although it is now an essential feature of a democratic state, Russia didn't introduce publicly funded education because they valued democracy or human rights and thought, oh, our citizens have a right to education. Let's make it available to everyone for free. Neither democracy nor human rights, as we understand them now, even existed then. The Prussian state had an agenda that it wanted to indoctrinate its citizens on. And so, of course, the state had to pay for it because people weren't going to pay for an education that was foisted on them against their will. The problem isn't about what was in the agenda. It was that the state was abusing its authority by imposing its agenda. This coercive model of foisted education is what got mainstream and later was legitimized by states misappropriating the universal right to basic education in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It was originally meant to be an obligation on the state to provide quality education to all without discrimination, but was instead used to make it compulsory to attend state-sanctioned schools regardless of their quality. The basic practices of public schooling, and even in most private schooling and home education, are not founded on seeing children as the subjects of rights. And because they have been embedded in society for decades or even centuries, it took a long time for people to even question whether they uphold children's rights. Even in the United Nations rights discourse, it wasn't until the early 2000s that there was a dawning recognition that educational practice could do better at respecting child rights, and that some kind of overhaul was necessary. And this is where it got really interesting for me, and I hope this will inspire you too. Back in 2005, the United Nations approved a proposal for a rights-based quality assurance system for schools to evaluate how well they respected human rights of students and staff. And nothing happened. But of course, approving a proposal is one thing, operationalizing it for every child and educator on the whole planet is quite another. It's a tough ask, but we, as civil society, believe this as a legitimate proposal by a legitimate authority to advance international human rights law is one of the best ways to promote the realization of human rights, and especially child rights, not only to education, but also in education. So nearly 20 years after the proposal is approved, on the 35th anniversary of the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, we as civil society are going to action that proposal, initially focusing on the rights of children, and we would deeply appreciate your support. We are calling it the Rights-Centric Education Framework, or the RCE framework for short, where each educational environment working with children will regularly make a voluntary public report on the concrete ways they uphold child rights and their plans for future improvement. Why we say educational environment is because education doesn't only happen in schools, and this is also recognized in the rights discourse. So not only schools, but also home educating families, daycares, refugee centers, rehabilitation centers, juvenile correctional facilities, and so on, are welcome to participate in the framework and work towards ensuring their practices respect and advance child rights. We plan to publicly launch Rights-Centric Education on the 20th of November, the 35th anniversary on the Convention on the Rights of the Child, and we hope you will join us.
And when Stefan says join us, it is not in the sense of becoming a member of an organization with membership criteria, certifications, audits, and fees, and so on. In the spirit of inclusion, and because we strongly believe that these rights must be advanced for all children, there will never be any fees charged to participate in or benefit from the RCE framework. And there will never be any gatekeeping or exclusionary admission criteria to decide which educational environments can participate. But we do need a way to identify individuals and organizations who are participating in the RCE framework, and for those individuals and organizations to communicate that they are participating in the framework. And so we are calling them members of the RCE network. Currently, a few volunteer founding members are working on the processes necessary to action the RCE framework, forming allyships with other actors working to advance child rights, especially in education, outreach to spread the message of RCE and find potential members ahead of the formal launch, preparing a declaration calling for educational practice to be overhauled to respect and advance child rights, preparing formats of a pledge to be made to the young people in educational environments on what concrete steps will be taken, processes to collect, authenticate, and publish reports, and of course, communication and content creation, website, mailing lists, social media, and so on. So this video is mainly to reach out to more potential founding members to help get rights-centric education off the ground. If you're able to support us, please see our website for more details. We hope that you can join us by latest September 20th so that we can have a big launch on November the 20th, 2024. If you don't have the capacity to contribute at this time, please see the caption of this video for other ways that you can support us at this time. I would like to emphasize that it is our wish for the RCE network to be a welcoming and inclusive initiative of mutual support, where everyone can share and co-inspire plans to make a difference right from the start. It doesn't matter whether an educational setting is starting from a place of investigating alternatives to corporal punishment or refining their already world-class student participation mechanisms. This is about welcoming every sincere change maker to begin from wherever it is that they are, to share what they're doing well, to inspire others, and to be inspired by others to do better towards a shared goal of advancing child rights to and in education. This is not a space for one-upmanship, competition, or division. We are all in this together as a species, uniting behind a great idea because the time has come, and because that is the spirit and purpose of rights in the first place. As law professor and rights defender Jonathan Todres points out, children's rights law does not so much guarantee that adults will respect the rights of young people, as it depends on adults accepting that children have rights and acting to help children secure those rights. It's now up to us, the adults at grassroots level, parents, educators, administrators, policymakers, all of us who have day-to-day concrete and granular impact on young people's direct educational experience. We need to make the shift. We, the citizens, the planetizens, need to make the change, because that is the only way that real change is possible. So thank you for watching, and we hope we can work together to realize rights-centric education for all children everywhere in our world.